So by now, many people will have heard of the exchange at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, between Black Frederick Douglass Republican K. Carl Smith and white segregationist Scott Terry. Their fateful meeting took place during a breakout session on minority outreach called, artfully, Trump the Race Card. Are you sick and tired of being called a racist and you know you're not one? I will leave to others the issue of what attracted a clear racist like Terry and his buddy Matt Heimbach to CPAC in the first place. I will resist any inclination to position these young segregationists as the face of CPAC. If Sarah Palin, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and Allen West don't tell you all you need to know about that conference, you're beyond help. So while there are many lessons to be learned from the video of this event, for now, I want to focus your attention on one inescapable fact. Today's Republican Party is really no place for a self-respecting Black person. Now, I can't possibly cover all that I have to say about this in one video, so I intend to cover it over a series of posts because I believe it is instructive to so many parties: Black liberals, Black conservatives, white conservatives, the GOP leadership, and maybe even white separatists. Just to recap, Mr. Smith, a Black conservative, gave a presentation on what he believes is nothing less than a revolutionary way to win Black voters to the Republican Party. Those seeking to win Blacks to the party should not refer to themselves as conservatives or Republicans, but Frederick Douglass Republicans. Apparently, the words conservative and Republican are synonymous with racist in the minds of Black people. But if one were to say, I am not a Republican, I am a Frederick Douglass Republican, the mere mentioning of the great Black abolitionist will cause the tiny brains of African Americans to short circuit, presumably because they cannot hold Douglass good and Republican bad in their minds at the same time. This will allow the conservative to point out that Douglass was a Republican and give him a precious few moments to shove some right-wing information in there about the Democratic plantation and the horrors of greater access to health care. That is the entirety of Smith's idea, really. And CPAC gave him a whole session in which to share it. Again, instead of saying that you're a Republican, say you're a Frederick Douglass Republican. That's it. Well, that, and buy his book about exactly the same thing, and his supplemental guide to his book about exactly the same thing. Oh, and buy his t-shirt, and join his Frederick Douglass Republican organization. The session was really just an infomercial to pitch Smith's products to the gullible, or at least it was supposed to be. Anyway, the small room was full, and as far as I know, other than the Black presenter and his brother, the entire audience consisted of white people interested in knowing more about how not to be called a racist, and one Black woman, a non-conservative political commentator named Kim Brown. During the presentation, Mr. K. Carl Smith made a variety of statements that would make the saddest panda even sadder. Mr. K. Carl Smith informed this white crowd that Frederick Douglass embodied basic conservative principles that made him a wonderful representative of the Black Republican. For example, he explained that Frederick Douglass was rich. Exposing Black people to this fact will supposedly make Black people feel good about rich people. And he explained that Douglass ran away from slavery, not because of the backbreaking work of being a slave, or the abuse or the degradation, or even because of the theft of his labor. No, Smith tells us he ran away to escape, and I quote, slave master-run healthcare. He escaped from slave master entitlements. He escaped from slave master welfare programs. Douglass was a 47%er. End quote. What's that you say? You say you don't believe that any Black man would ever fix his mouth to say something like that, ever? You say that no one claiming allegiance to the great Frederick Douglass would disgrace his name by suggesting that present-day African Americans live on the Democratic plantation and must run away from Obamacare, just like Frederick Douglass ran away from free health care and the benefits he received as a slave? Well, you asked for it.
Douglass escapes from slavery at the age of 20. He escapes from slavery at the age of 20. He escapes from slavery at the age of 20. What did he escape from? Slave master run healthcare. He escaped from slave master entitlements. He escaped from slave master welfare program. Douglass was a 47%. He was a 47%.
So, there you have it. And I forgive you for doubting me. I've watched it a dozen times and I still can barely believe it. No black audience anywhere will remain under the dazed influence of the Frederick Douglass spell once someone suggested that running away from black chattel slavery was like running away from home, where, sure, your parents housed you and fed you and put you on their health insurance, but one day you just couldn't take it anymore. You couldn't take all of their rules, man, but it was their house, so their rules, so you moved out and got yourself a little studio apartment. It was small, but it was yours, and you were independent, so, what the hell? But see, it wasn't said to black people. And the dismissive way it addresses slavery says a lot about the lengths to which black conservatives will go to make their white audiences feel comfortable. Because let's be clear, black conservatives, pundits, authors, bloggers, and speakers are virtually never talking to black people. They are talking about black people, to white people. In the question and answer portion, Scott Terry, the white segregationist student from a local university, stands to ask a question.
It seems to me like you're reaching out to voters in that program that you're offering us at the expense of young white Southern males like myself, my demographic. I study literature, English literature and stuff, and as I read about the past, I really came to love my people and my culture.
Okay.
And that, I know that's anathema, I mean, I know that's bad to say. So my question would be, I feel like my people, my demographic are being systematically disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And furthermore, people like the lady over here in the red shirt applauded and said, yay, that's good. My problem is, why can't we be more like Booker T. Washington Republicans? And his famous statement that let's be unified like a hand, but separate like a finger.
Okay. The question is, why can't we be more unified by Booker T. Washington Republicans versus Frederick Douglass? They call Booker T. Washington second Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm. See, why can't we be separate like the fingers on the hand? Now, that's not the craziest question that I've ever heard from a white supremacist, but Terry has explicitly asked at a strategy session on how to attract blacks to the conservative movement why Americans simply can't go back to racial segregation. The crowd is surprised, expecting K. Carl Smith to dress down Terry, but Smith's reaction is remarkable. Does he get upset, become indignant, kick Terry out of the session? Read Terry the Riot Act? Look, if you're running a discussion at a conservative conference on attracting black people to the movement, wouldn't you immediately smack down such talk? Wouldn't you point out that Terry's comments are exactly the kind of thing conservatives shouldn't be saying or thinking? Even if K. Carl Smith had immediately declared Terry to be a political plant, that would have at least meant he was willing to call out such divisive talk. But no, instead of taking issue with segregation directly, he suggests that Frederick Douglass would have been in favor of racial segregation, calling Booker T. Washington, quote, the second Frederick Douglass. But that doesn't make sense here, because Douglass was fervently and openly anti-segregation and would never have suggested racial segregation could be good for anyone. And even Washington only said so because he feared that, due to the pervasive racism of the time, confrontation by outnumbered blacks might lead to their destruction. Secretly, Washington funded civil rights cases. And I'll bet Scott Terry already knew that. I wonder if K. Carl Smith did. Why is K. Carl Smith running around talking to white conservatives about Frederick Douglass when he doesn't seem to know that Frederick Douglass was against segregation? And if he did know, then why didn't he tell Terry so? Why did he, basically, stand there and take it? Maybe it is because that is part of a black conservative spokesman's job description. A big part of the black conservative's job is to heap abuse upon other black people, to call us the lazy, shiftless, ignorant whiners that white conservatives are hesitant to call us. And when they're not doing that, their job is to provide cover to white conservatives that do denigrate us, standing virtually mute as this flat-out racist muses on why we can't just have racial segregation in America again, why we can't go back to separate but equal, why we can't give up an issue that was at the heart of the civil rights movement. This was probably one of the easier assignments a black conservative like K. Carl Smith had at CPAC. Black Republicans are the absolute worst salesmen of black conservatism. Prior to this incident, I had never heard of K. Carl Smith or his organization. But I believe that he is a fine example of the black conservative selling that black recruitment snake oil. They all offer the same wares. Give me some money and I'll get them black folks off that Democratic plantation and onto this here Republican one. And I don't think K. Carl Smith handled himself especially poorly. I don't think Alfonso Rachel or conservative black chick or even disgraced and disgraceful Lieutenant Colonel Allen West would have done any better. They all would have nodded attentively as a man argued for the return of racial segregation. They would all have shrugged at the suggestion that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Marxist, a comment made by Terry's friend, more on that later. They would have stood mute at the suggestion that Frederick Douglass should have been grateful for all of that free food and shelter and health care. It is possible that black people might be intrigued by the idea of being a Frederick Douglass Republican, but most of us are greatly afraid that, in the process, we will become K. Carl Smith Republicans and shame our families and our people. There is much more to say. I've barely scratched the surface. I will cover more in the future. But this video is a virtual Rosetta Stone for Republicans that wonder why black Democrats reject their party, and for the black Republicans asked to defend why they don't reject the GOP. As I keep saying, the GOP sending black conservatives to recruit black people is like a butcher sending lamb chops to recruit sheep.